Okay, so the mid-December tradition continues. This is going to be my yearly recap of the books that I read, and I'll give you my top 5 recommendations. I set a new personal record this year. At the time of recording, I've read 104 books, and every single year I say that I'm going to focus more on output and less on input, that I'm going to read less and write more, and it seems like every year the opposite happens. So let's try again 2022. This year, I'm going to do a top 5 in fiction and a top 5 in nonfiction. Today, I'm going to go through the fiction, and in a couple days, I'll upload a video about the top 5 nonfiction. The rubric that I use is going to be the same as every year. These are the books that I enjoyed while I was reading them and that have stuck with me and inspired interesting conversations in the time since reading them. To organize this list and give it order, I'm going to use a big poster that I hang in my classroom with an image of all the books I've read throughout the year. In other words, I'm going to present these books in the order that I read them, not like a hierarchy of how good they are. The first 2 books on this list are debut novels, and I am guaranteed to pre-order whatever these authors write next. The first is Lustre by Raven Lalani, and the first thing I have to mention about this is just how well it's written. Like, at the level of this sentence, this book is wonderful in the same way that, like, The Great Gatsby or An Infinite Jest is wonderful. There is a precision of language here that I simply have to admire. Second, it's hilarious. There are lines in it that made me laugh out loud. But ultimately, this book makes the list because of the first-person narrator, Edie. It's a character study. It's a portrait, which is ironic because the narrator is a portrait artist who struggles with painting her own portrait. She's a woman with very little traditional power. She has no family support network. She doesn't have money. She's a black woman in a romantic relationship with a married white man who is older than her. And the list could keep on going. In this novel, she refashions that powerlessness as desire and aspires to seek it out and fetishizes her subordinate position in these roles. In addition to that, the man she's dating is a digital archivist whose job is literally to maintain and preserve the stories and power structures of the past. The wife of the man that she's seeing performs autopsies to better understand the stories that our bodies tell. And the narrator, Edie, is an artist who tries to paint emotional authenticity. So you've got these 3 poles of storytelling in competition with each other: an archivist, a scientist, and an artist. This one will make you think. Next up is How Much of These Hills is Gold, the debut novel by C. Pam Zhang, which I read because it was nominated for the Booker Prize last year. It's a Western, but it's not your typical Western. The protagonists are Chinese, one of whom is transgender, so it's not like a John Wayne kind of Western. It begins as a classic quest narrative. 2 adolescent children set out to bury their dead father. From there, it's a story filled with symbolic and metaphorical meaning that focuses on the ways that people extract gold from the land, how children extract resources from their parents, and generally how people extract value from each other in diverse ways. Each character has a moral code that they aspire to live by, in line with the Western genre, but each character finds a breaking point where the values that they aspire to are no longer useful or tenable. It's not a feel-good kind of book, but it is a book that'll give you a lot of feelings that you want to talk about. The third book on this list is the one that you probably expect to be on this list: Kazuo Ishiguro's Clara and the Sun. It takes place sometime vaguely in the future when gene editing allows for some sort of cognitive enhancement. A young girl named Josie is chronically sick as a result of this gene editing, and her mother buys her an artificial friend, a robot with AI that's going to comfort her. Similar to Never Let Me Go, it deals with technology and morality and asks big questions about what parts of our lives we want to outsource and what parts we want to keep, and whether or not our individuality is a fungible quality. Like, can we, or the people that we care about, be replaced by an artificial intelligence made to think and act the way that those people do? Can we replace them in the same way that, like, I don't know, a $5 bill can be replaced by another $5 bill and it doesn't matter? It's a complicated book with lots to think about. I recommend it. Next up, we have a novel called Heaven by Mieko Kawakami. It's a short one, and I couldn't put it down. I read it in like 1 or 2 days over the summer. It has an unnamed first-person narrator who is ruthlessly bullied and finds solidarity in one of his peers who is also bullied. The narrator finds himself stuck between a morality that attempts to turn his suffering into a virtue and an antagonist with a seductive Nietzschean will-to-power worldview. It's riveting. Highly recommend it. And the last one on this list is a weird one, and I know that. It's called When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labatut. It's the type of book that I love, but I would hesitate to recommend. I don't even know if it's a novel. I don't know what it is. It's like 1/3 history, 1/3 fiction, and 1/3 philosophy of math and science. It reads like a series of narrative essays about the limits of human knowledge, but somehow still has a really tight narrative that flows through some major figures of math and science like Fritz Haber, Schrödinger, Grothendieck, Heisenberg, but also introduces some fictional characters along the way. I loved every page of it, changed the way that I think, would recommend. And that's the list, but I do want to note a few honorable mentions. Bewilderment by Richard Powers was a heartbreaking work of climb-fi. That's climate fiction, for those of you new to BookTube. And because I'm a Rooney Toon, that's somebody who pre-orders and devours Sally Rooney books, I have to mention Beautiful World, Where Are You?, which was like reading a modern Socratic dialogue. And if you're into sci-fi, Becky Chambers published 2 great books this year. Psalm for the Wild Built, great title. And she published the latest book of the Wayfarer series, The Galaxy and the Ground Within. Both really worth reading. It was a good year for books. Also, I gotta mention some books that I've covered on my podcast, Literary Connections, which you can listen to wherever you get your podcast. One Last Stop was really fun, and the latest episode is on The House in the Cerulean Sea, which I think was the best book that we read for the podcast this year. There'll be links to everything in the description below. In a couple days, I'll publish the best nonfiction books of the year. Let me know if you've read any of these and have thoughts. I'll see you in the comments.